Coming up on this edition of the Black Vault Radio, astronomer and UFO investigator Mr. Marc D'Antonio steps into the vault. Marc dissects his background and involvement with the field of ufology, and he explores a personal experience he had on board a naval submarine that defies explanation.
One of the folks that said, "Would you like to go for a ride in a sub?" Yeah. Okay. And so there I was. I was on this sub. When he told the executive officer how fast he calculated the movement, he said it loudly because he was sort of incredulous. He said, "Several hundred knots, sir." I was like blown away.
Yeah.
I mean, what does that mean? You know, that's crazy. I have lived with this for a number of decades, just like astonished that this happened.
All that and much more. So stay tuned. The Black Vault Radio is about to begin. More than 20 years ago, I began a journey. My quest for the truth. My name is John Greenewald, and I have hammered the United States government with Freedom of Information Act requests trying to get answers. I have more than 2 million pages of declassified documents for you to download at theblackvault.com. Now, I attempt to dive even deeper and talk to some of the most brilliant minds on this planet. No government secret is off limits, and no question is off the table. All I aim for is the truth. This is the Black Vault Radio. That's right, everybody. This is the Black Vault Radio. I am your host, John Greenewald Jr. As always, thank you so much for tuning in and making this your podcast and radio show of choice. No matter the way you are listening, whether it be on iTunes or all the other platforms that are now streaming this, I want to apologize for the delay that it's been a couple weeks since my interview with David Paulides, which was my last show. I'll be honest with you, though, that was one heck of a show to leave you with. Since I had to take a couple weeks off. Now, this was not planned. I actually had an interview that was scheduled the week after my interview with David. In that show, and possibly the next one thereafter, wasn't sure which, but I was going to announce to you all a very, well, kind of rare personal thing that I don't really talk about very much, not only on this radio show, but also many of the social media platforms that you might be following the Black Vault. Now, some of you may be following my personal page on Facebook, and if you are, you will see some family photos that you may not be interested in, but you may have seen my announcement that my wife and I were expecting our second child, a baby girl, and she was actually had a delivery date of November 11th, which as of the recording of this show was yesterday. Now, I won't get into the details, but we actually had a C-section that was going to be scheduled for November 6th. Well, shortly after my interview and show that aired with David Paulides, and by the way, if you haven't listened to it, once you listen to this interview that I did with Marc D'Antonio on this particular show, go back into the archives, listen to that. It is hands down the most popular and most downloaded episode. There's a lot of interesting information that came around in that episode, so make sure you tune in. But that being said, shortly after I posted that show, my daughter decided that she was not going to wait for November 6th. In fact, it was about 3.5 weeks plus early. She decided she was too excited to wait to meet everyone, and she decided she was going to come. And to not bore you guys with the entire detail, I received a very frantic phone call from my wife. She was actually getting her hair done, and our baby girl decided she didn't want to wait for her hair to be done, and so she said this was it. Now, what's weird is we were just at the doctor's. My wife was just at the doctor's literally an hour before that. And although she was showing signs of potentially some action going on, she was fine. Got clearance by the doctor, you're okay, and sent her on her way. And within 1 hour, this baby girl decided to send my wife into overdrive, and it was time it was time. So I raced to go get her. Thankfully, got her to the hospital. I really thought that I would be delivering in a parking structure. But to fast forward the story, and it is a radio show in itself, my wife and I had a 6-pound, 3-ounce, very beautiful baby girl. Very unexpectedly early, but that's okay. Everyone is safe and happy and sound, and we spent a couple days in the hospital. Normal though, everything went perfect, despite some kind of craziness, which who knows? If I see you at a conference one day, we'll have to have a beer and I'll tell you all about it. But it was a little bit crazy, but at the end result was awesome, amazing, and everything went really well. So I'm really excited about that. But as a result, our life got turned upside down a little bit here in the Greenewald household. We now have 4 members living in our house, 3.5 to be exact, 3 1/8 probably. But anyway, that being said, we are kind of getting used to everything again. So my wife is doing absolutely amazing with everything and adjusting perfectly well. She's going to be off for a little bit, probably through the holidays. We'll be going back to work as a nurse in the ICU at the hospital we delivered at. So again, everybody is safe, sound, happy. Thank you all for your patience and understanding. I know it was kind of awkward where there were just no shows. I got your messages. That was very encouraging that you guys were looking for shows. So I want to thank you all for reaching out, seeing what was going on. The Black Vault Radio is alive and well. And I'm going to do a few changes, actually, that you will see in the coming episodes, starting with this one. Now, as you all know, if you've tuned in before, I have various audio segments with the interview. Now, obviously, the interview is the main brunt of the show. That's why a lot of people tune in. But in addition to that, I have the introduction, which is kind of what you're listening to now. I had a news segment, and we do TBV Unredacted, which is the segment towards the end of the show where I dissect a document. Now, that's going to stay. But what I am going to lift out for a couple different reasons is the news segment. Now, the news segment, although very popular, got quite a few comments and emails and people writing in and posting on various topics. In fact, a lot of times the news segment was more of a conversation generator than the interview itself, which was okay. It does prolong the actual show and also prolongs getting to the guest on why some of you might be listening. So here's what I'm thinking. Because it is a popular segment, I was considering maybe moving it towards the end, get to the interview quicker. But I thought, tell you what, let's go ahead and drop it all together for now. What I'm thinking about doing is making that a separate show, expanded from the segment that I was doing, but it very much timestamps the episode. So if you listen to, let's say, David Paulides' interview, well, if you listen to it the week that it posts, then the news makes sense. If you listen to it 6 months after it posts, the news is completely outdated and generally won't make sense. So I don't want to say it's a waste, but that's not what you're looking for. So I've listened to the feedback that some of you have sent in, and both the good and the bad, and I'm going to make that slight adjustment. So that'll get us fast forwarded to the interview a little bit quicker. The shows will be a little bit shorter, and hopefully it'll make getting them online a little bit easier. But I want to hear from you if you want to hear that news show. I don't want to make it it's not a nightly news broadcast or anything like that. But as you know, I do profile some of those news headlines that you don't necessarily hear about all the time in your mainstream media programs. I have a lot of fun bringing some of those stories up and yapping to you about them a little bit. So if you're interested in that and you did get a lot out of it, I am thinking about a separate show. But in order for me to really kind of get motivated with that, I need to hear from you. I want you to tell me if you want to hear that and you want those types of headlines. So I'll make a different audio show for that. Now, those are going to be the changes. A few more coming your way, including some fun stuff on YouTube in the Black Vault YouTube channel. So make sure that you subscribe if that's not how you're listening to now. I don't really advertise that much, but in the coming weeks and months, there will be a lot more fun content that is coming specifically and actually exclusively to that YouTube channel. including some live broadcasts. So if you don't know how to subscribe, just go to www.theblackvault.com/show notes, and that will go ahead and break down all of the different links, not only I'm talking about on this episode, but also link you over to all of the social network platforms that the Black Vault is connected to. Now, one quick note about the David Paulides interview. If you did or didn't listen to it, this is going to pertain to you anyway. There was some confusion about that show notes section on me linking over to David's Amazon page. Well, I know that David has spoken about this quite a bit, where he recommends people to buy books directly from him and not from Amazon. I recommend that to you also. In the show notes page, you do have links directly to David's website. However, for all of those guests on the Black Vault radio that you're listening to, I do link over to the Amazon page for a couple different reasons. There are some people that just don't buy anywhere but Amazon, but also it gives more information on the books that are linked to that author's name, in this case, David Paulides. Now, obviously, with David's books, Amazon is just incredibly expensive. So he doesn't recommend buying them there, and I want to make sure that you all know that. I wasn't trying to mislead anyone or point you to Amazon to make you spend 5 times as much. It was actually less about that, more just giving you the link to a reputable source to break down his books, some more author information, but it also helps that some people, they don't like to buy outside of the eBays and the Amazons of the world, and that's okay. So we give that option. Not the best option financially, but an option nonetheless. But if you're confused by that, I wanted to explain it a little bit. But of course, I linked David's direct link to his website and how to order on his page above the Amazon link. Hopefully that explained it to you, because I try and be as detailed as possible in those show notes pages. That being said, coming up in the TBV Dialogues segment in this episode is Mr. Marc D'Antonio. Marc has done extensive work with analyzing UFO photos and videos. He has an astronomical background with having a degree in astronomy. He does a live stream every week showing you guys and educating you, the public, about astronomy and what you can see in the night sky, and he live streams bringing some of those celestial objects to life through his really amazing setup and telescope, and he's here to talk about all of that, including a USO, that's a UFO underwater, USO encounter that he had while on a submarine. It's a pretty cool story, and I wanted to bring him on to talk about that, because it's not every day that you hear somebody with his background talk about UFOs, USOs, and on top of that, have some personal experiences to share. So that's coming up, Mr. Marc D'Antonio in the TBV Dialogue segment. Stay tuned. In this episode's TBV Dialogue segment, I welcome Mr. Marc D'Antonio into the vault. Marc has a degree in astronomy. He serves as the Mutual UFO Network's, or MUFON, Chief Photo Video Analyst. He hosts Sky Tour Radio on KGRA, and he is the host and creator of Sky Tour Livestream with Marc D'Antonio, currently streaming on YouTube. This show is where people can go to watch Marc live and discover deep night sky objects materialize before their eyes in mere seconds, courtesy of the Sky Tour Observatory and its research telescope. He also is the CEO of FX Models, wherein he makes models and organic visual effects for the motion picture industry. You'll recognize Marc and his name, having conducted various lectures throughout the country, and has appeared in many television shows due to his expertise and his background. These shows include NASA's Unexplained Files on the Discovery Channel and What on Earth on the Science Channel, just to name a couple. Marc, you have a great resume. It's an honor to have you. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks, John. Thanks for having me.
And I always enjoy people with your expertise and background. I've talked a lot about those in the astronomy community in the past here on the show, and it's something that just absolutely fascinates me to no end. And now, obviously, you have a degree in that. Talk to me a little bit about your background and where that degree came from and what got you interested into astronomy itself.
Something that goes back all the way to my childhood. I mean, for most people, it does. You don't just become like a college student and say, hey, I think I want to do astronomy. You go to school, you go to college to become an astronomer. You don't, make it up when you get there.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was 9 and I went outside, I looked up at the sky. I got my first telescope at age 9 after getting out of the hospital from a surgery. And I couldn't do anything but recover. And while I was recovering, this telescope was my go-to instrument to have fun. And so I spent a lot of hours looking at the night sky, looking at these wonders that just can't be seen without a telescope. Your eye can show you only so much. Your eye is a very tiny telescope, and it's only one power, and it's a very small aperture. It's only that size of your iris. And so a telescope, even the one that's only 2 inches in diameter, which is the first one I had, was just amazing what it would show you. So I ended up deciding right then and there, I'm going to be an astronomer when I grow up.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know what astronomers do, but I knew that I was going to be one. And, once I did go through and get my degree in astronomy, I said, wow, I'm actually an astronomer. Now, what am I going to do for work? And so I went into a master's program for computer science. After I didn't complete that because I was one course shy. I ran out of money, and it was just I realized I was going to work for myself. So I ended up just putting astronomy aside for a while, going into the computer industry, and then it just resurfaces, your first love. It always comes back, and astronomy has been mine. So now we have this observatory, as you mentioned, the Sky Tour live stream observatory, and we take people on a nightly tour of deep sky objects with these very special cameras that allow us to see things in seconds, not the many minutes it would take to get an image. So, I get a lot of fulfillment from that. And I do have an observatory dome on my front lawn. And it's sort of a minion that sits out on my front lawn. Everybody in the town knows it's there, and they kind of shake their heads when they go by. Well, look at that guy, what's he doing, But the fact is, when that dome opens, people from all over the world join on the live stream, and they are treated to a very special experience, I think. And for the most part, they like it. And my co-host is Amanda Curran, who lives in Nova Scotia. She's also the co-host on Sky Tour Radio. So together, we take people on this tour, and it's a lot of fun.
Now, Marc's website is www.fxmodels.com, but all of these YouTube channels and videos and everything, I will definitely link on the show notes page. If you don't know how to get there, it's www.theblackvault.com/show notes, and that will go ahead and break down everything that Marc and I are talking about. Marc, I've tuned in, and it is very, very cool. Like I said, I geek out with stuff like that, and you obviously have an extensive background and a lot of knowledge. But I give you a lot of credit that you're doing this show, educating the public, and there's not a whole lot of people that really care to do that nowadays. And so please accept my sincere thanks on behalf of a very sizable audience that you got tuning in, watching you do this, because it's very, very cool, something that I always love learning about. So I would recommend all of those listening, make sure that you visit Marc's YouTube channel and tune into the next live broadcast, because they are very, very neat to watch. Now, Marc, you obviously have a kind of a background and a following also in the field of ufology. Now, I'm not saying that this is completely unheard of, but it's kind of rare when somebody with such a scientific background then also is very much into the UFO phenomenon and looking into it, analyzing videos, photos, and so on. How did you get from astronomy to ufology, or was that also from your childhood?
When I was in grade school, we took a trip to a pond here in Connecticut, where I live. And I remember getting on the bus with my little brown bag lunch. I remember the bus ride to the pond. I remember walking off the bus. And then the next thing I remember, I was walking on the bus with my brown bag of lunch, uneaten, after a full day there. Went back to the school, came home with my little brown bag lunch. And my mother said, "Oh, did you have a good day?" And I basically said, "I don't know." And that evening, I was playing in between the houses in my house here, and I started having convulsions. And I was rushed to the hospital, and they didn't know what was wrong with me, and neither did I. And they said, "What happened? Did you fall? Did you get a concussion?" And I said, because I was nervous and scared, I said, "Yeah, I fell. I didn't remember falling. I don't think I fell." And I said, "I fell on a dock at the pond." Well, had anyone done any research, they would have discovered that this was a raw pond. There are no docks. There's never been a dock. To this day, there's no dock. So I don't know what happened. And that was sort of a missing time experience for me. And I've never been able to explain it. But I began to think that, is it possible that this is one of those missing time things that I hear about? And at the time, I had to go to a library to get books to read about this because we didn't have an internet to do that with. And so I was looking over books and so forth. And I'm very cautious. I was always, even then, I didn't believe everything I read. It was more like, okay, well, that has to be proven. Okay, that has to be proven to me. I can't just accept that. But over time, I came to think that maybe there was an experience that I wasn't aware of that happened. Could I have fallen? Sure. But I don't think so. Now, fast forward, I get the astronomy degree, and I focused on exoplanets, which are planets around other stars. And we found so many of these planets that could be like the Earth, and that tells me that, we have as many as 25 million in the low end in our galaxy to up to 40 billion at the high end. All right. And that's Earth-like planets in the habitable zone, that not too hot, not too cold zone around the star. And that means that those are planets that could potentially harbor life if they have an atmosphere and a magnetic field like our planet. Well, if that's the case, then life elsewhere in the universe is most likely a certainty. And a lot of astronomers in academia will also agree that life elsewhere is a certainty. But then they falter when it comes to, but can they be here? Well, I believe they can. And I believe it because of the technology we see already. We can't do it yet because we don't have the ability to harness the amount of energy required. But in Star Trek, there was a famous, the warp drive. Gene Roddenberry came up with the warp drive, but he didn't develop that in a vacuum. He developed it from, certain scientific data that was available at the time. But the idea of the warp drive was that you could bend space and then travel through space and then, and circumvent the speed of light. Well, believe it or not, a warp drive can exist, and it's been postulated by a guy named Miguel Alcubierre. And now Sonny White down at NASA, Dr. White has actually championed this drive with the help of a guy named Froning. And it's so plausible now. The energy requirements are much less than they were, and they can actually possibly get to Alpha Centauri, the nearest star system, not in the 15 or 12 to 15,000 years it would take with current technology, but in 5 days. And that's if they can develop it. Now, it's so plausible, so to speak, now that NASA is actually funding the lab to create this Froning Alcubierre drive. Now, that's a true warp drive. It actually basically takes the opposite corners of paper, and instead of traversing corner to corner on a piece of paper, you fold it up so the corners almost touch. And now you just have to jump across that narrow gap point to point. And then you unfold the paper, and you've gone that massive distance in a very short time. That's kind of the concept. Really cool, and we see that now. We see that now, John. And we've only existed as a history-keeping species for about 5,000 years, if you go back to Sumeria and the cuneiform language. And so from that point forward, we already see ways to circumvent the speed of light in 5,000 years. Now, the last thing I'll mention here is the Earth has been here for 4.6 billion years. The universe existed for 9+ billion years before the Earth even showed up, and before the sun was even formed. So what happened then? We see planets that were born literally a billion years or less after the universe began.
Yeah. So
clearly, there's a lot of planets out there, John, and clearly there's a lot of potential for life elsewhere, and the rise to intelligence. That ascendancy to intelligence is something that we just say is ours because we're here. This is us. We don't have the ability to look beyond us, correct, right? So we don't know what else is out there. But I do believe that there are species out there that could not only use an Alcubierre process because that's a natural offshoot of understanding the universe, but a further process that's within the very complicated string world, which is a process where you could literally punch out of our dimensional space and punch in anywhere else you want. Now, that sounds like science fiction, but then again, so was breaking the sound barrier. Before planes could do that, right? So I think that we're talking about just taking, again, as we usually do, science fiction and turning it into science fact. We do that all the time. Your cell phone is far more powerful than Captain Kirk's communicator.
It seems like science fiction always does kind of come before actual science fact, and then you realize there's more truth to science fiction than what you want to believe. Let me ask you one quick question before we kind of dig deeper into that science. That experience you had as a child with the missing time, it seems like as your profession and your own intelligence progressed, you kind of bridged the potential that you did have I don't want to call it an otherworldly experience, so help me with how you kind of label it, but with kind of now your reinforcement that an intelligent life is out there, do you now think that played a role in your missing time episode, or are you just thinking that that's one of many possibilities?
Well, it's not the only thing that ever happened to me, but yeah, to answer your question, yes. And you know what, I was remiss in finishing my point about that earlier. I brought that point up to stress that, what got me into UFOs from astronomy was experiences like that, where I began to think about the possibilities. And I began to look up and not see just stars. I saw worlds. Mm-hmm. And when I was getting my astronomy degree, I said to the head of my department, I said to this guy, I said, look, I believe that it's a populated universe. Now, this was before any exoplanets were found, by the way. Mm-hmm. This was in the mid-'80s. And I said to him, this universe is full of other planets, probably like Earth. And he looked at me and in true academia form said, Mr. D'Antonio, get back in the observatory and get done with your research and leave Captain Kirk to us. Okay. And I was like, wow. Okay. And then in 1987, the first announced planet was the Canada actually was announced. And then in the early 90s, it was confirmed. And I went back and I peeked my head into his office. And you know what? He remembered that conversation because as soon as I peeked in, I put this big smile on my face. He looked at me with a smile on his face. He said, it was only one planet.
That's funny.
It was only one planet. I said, it's just the beginning, And of course, it turned out, and I mean, of course, I wasn't wrong. Obviously, if you find one, there's going to be billions. So clearly, that's the case. So I do believe that. And that term that I used when I talked to him back then, I called it a populated universe. That actually became the title of the book I wrote on exoplanets and the prospects of life elsewhere, and it's called The Populated Universe. It's not published yet. It's actually in editing right now, but it'll be out hopefully in the next few months. I'm very hopeful, and it's a book that talks about my contention that life in the universe is the rule, not the exception. Mm-hmm. It used to be around. Remember the Drake equation that Frank Drake came up with, where he calculated the probability of planets like the Earth elsewhere, and of course, the number always came out to just like ours, 1, right?
Yeah.
Well, that answer now has to be, and of course, Frank Drake's equation, you can't possibly know the real answer. But several new teams, including an Italian team and an American team, actually redesigned the Drake equation to calculate the probabilities of intelligent life elsewhere. And now the numbers don't come out to 1 anymore. They come out minimally to this 25 million number I mentioned before, and maximally to a much larger number. So, and that's just in our galaxy.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, there's 2 trillion plus galaxies. So you see, we're silly to think that there isn't intelligent life elsewhere. I think that the universe creates templates for intelligence, literally. I mean, it doesn't mean life always becomes intelligent, right? But think about this. Every higher life form on our planet has this bilateral symmetry about their central axis. And that's with the way they interact with their world. It's all symmetry. The universe has this magical symmetry that it provides as a template because every life form illustrates it, okay, without our involvement. And then the carbon atom is ubiquitous. It's everywhere in the universe. And we are a carbon-based species. So it's okay to look for other carbon-based species because comets, meteors, and the Earth itself make these carbon-based building blocks of life, okay? And so to me, it's okay to not think about silicon-based life, but just carbon-based life because there's plenty of that out there, I'm sure. And we'll be very good at finding carbon-based life. So,
why do you think that the scientific community does not have that common sense, what I consider a very scientific method for thinking about this kind of thing, where life and intelligence is, when you just use common sense, we believe is out there. But on a scientific level, with what you are talking about, it's undoubtedly out there. Why aren't more in the scientific community thinking like that? It's like, let me make a quick point. It's like they go from these really amazing discoveries on a scientific level. They skip the whole possibility of intelligent life. And then some in the scientific community say, yeah, well, when we meet aliens out there, they're going to be robotic and artificial intelligence, which, the Dr. Seth Shostak's in that arm of all of this, they talk about. So, but they skip like the physical UFO evidence that actually does exist out there. Why aren't more scientists thinking logically?
I think I have an answer to that will satisfy some, not satisfy others. I think the answer really has to lie with the perception of the UFO and the little green alien. I mean, this is a perception that is built into our culture. Mm-hmm. Now, in other cultures, it's actually quite common to portray potential aliens as gods. All right, if you look at the Wandjina myth down in Australia, the Wandjina were said to come from the sky, live in the sea, and have mastery of the water. Well, the Wandjina myth is fundamental in Aboriginal myth, yet it's a godlike role that the potential creatures take on. Now, is it just a myth? Maybe. Sure, it could be just a myth. It could not be real, but there's cave pictographs all over Australia, the Kimberley region of Australia, that show these Wandjina with these big dark eyes and these little tiny mouths. And, of course, something that I feel is very important, and that's the halo. Many deities are shown with a halo around their head. So that's a whole nother thing, okay, which I did a talk on that in Denver, which was, the ubiquitous halo. The halo indicates something. It was seen. That's why it was reproduced. But so science doesn't accept these things because of the fact, I think, that modern culture has made so much fun of ufology that it's marginalized it. And you can't even say ufology is an actual science to some people.
Yeah.
Yet to me, ufology is just the study of extraterrestrial life and the potential that they're here. Mm-hmm. That's what ufology is to me. If I said to someone, I'm studying the potential that there's extraterrestrial life and that they're here. Oh, that's neat. Do you study UFOs? Yes. Well, you're a nut. You see, it's just terminology and semantics, John. And I don't think that when you say to someone that believing in UFOs makes you if you say to someone believing in UFOs makes you a nut, I don't think they're going to turn right around and say, well, I'm going to continue full steam. They're going to say, well, maybe I just better back off a little bit.
Yeah.
I know people in academia that are dying to say they believe that extraterrestrial life can be intelligent and possibly even be here. Mm-hmm. I know there's people dying to say that. But they don't, because they have tenure at a university. They don't want to say things that are going to get them in trouble. They don't want to become controversial. By and large, astronomers, astrophysicists, they're pretty conservative guys, and girls, actually, women and men. They're very conservative in general, and they don't tend to, do that. Okay, Tabitha Boyajian, an astronomer who discovered Tabby Star. Tabby Star is a star that seemed like it was having this unknown type of dimming that was occurring in front of it for actually over 100 years. And the thought process was, is this an alien megastructure? Is this a structure being built around the star that's selectively dimming the light from the star over 100 years? And Tabitha did not dismiss that out of hand. She didn't. She didn't say, oh, it's not an alien structure. We just don't know what it is yet. She didn't say that. She said, well, it's possible. You know why? Because her mind was open. And that's the first step. Academia has to open their minds just a little bit, because sooner or later they're going to realize that they're on the wrong side of the fence. Yeah. And I give credit to Tabitha Boyajian. Now, it may not be an alien megastructure. It might just be a dust cloud moving between the star and the planet Earth that is actually causing this dimming. And the universe has time scales of thousands of years, millions of years. So, seeing a dust cloud for 100 is a drop in the bucket. It's not even noticeable on the cosmic scale. So, again, we need more time, more data, and more ability to examine these things. There's so many things to examine. I mean, we can't even decide if Pluto is a planet again.
Yeah. And it seems like science gets rewritten and then rewritten back. And then, I don't know if there's a such thing as science fact anymore, because the minute a claim is made, it's just kind of rewritten and then it's controversial and so on. I remember when I was producing a show for History Channel and the controversy about Tabby Star came out. And although we couldn't really do it because it was very much science that was unfolding at the time, and but the minute it would air on History Channel, it would completely be outdated. In that show, I actually worked in a Dyson sphere and the whole concept of a mega structure harnessing the power of the sun. It was a fascinating look at what is out there. Do scientific advancements and the fields of various fields of science today, are those advancements, without saying the word UFO or acronym UFO, are they helping support that the phenomenon really is out there?
Oh, you know what? I have to agree with that 100%. And here's why. You cannot deny that the number of habitable worlds that are being found, potentially habitable worlds, they have to, of course, have an atmosphere and the other accoutrements that make life reasonable for a carbon-based species like us. But the number of those worlds being found is quite literally astronomical. And numbers in the, up from I said 25 million up to 40 billion just in our galaxy. And that's a massive number. So what does that do? What's that do to the discussion? Okay, what it does to the discussion about extraterrestrial life and intelligence possibilities is it changes the statistics massively. Because you say, well, if we exist, then you can say, well, I guess other worlds like ours exist. We're kind of an ordinary planet around an ordinary star. People say, well, we have a moon, and if we didn't have the moon, we wouldn't have life on this planet. Well, why? And they say, well, the tides. The moon causes tides. Yes, it does. But guess what else causes the tides? Sun. The sun causes tides. They're about half the magnitude of the moon's. So it still is potentially possible that a moonless planet could also have harbored life. So this gives us a lot more possibilities. So the question becomes not, is there other life out there, but we know there's other life out there, and most in academia will agree to that. In fact, we're even hopeful we'll find it even in our own solar system. When there's ice, for instance, and Enceladus is ice. Also within Titan, in fact. So, and then if it's, if there's life elsewhere, then it's probably going to appear in a habitable zone, and we have plenty of options for that. So the question doesn't become, is there life? It becomes, is there intelligent life? And then the statistics kind of shows that maybe that's possible. And then the question then is that's posed is, but can they be here? And I'll tell you this. When we look for an exoplanet in our primitive way that we use now, we're looking for a planet in the habitable zone that might have an atmosphere, and the atmosphere might have diatomic or two oxygen atoms connected, and that's what we breathe, O2, all right? And that stands out like a sore thumb to these detectors in some ways. And basically, Stephen Hawking once said, I don't think we should announce our presence. Well, he's possibly right in some circles, but guess what? We can't help it because our oxygenated atmosphere is announcing our presence. And why do I say that? I mean, I say that because of the fact that the oxygen in an atmosphere doesn't like to be there. It'll quickly leave the atmosphere and bind with many different minerals in the ground of the planet. All right? Mars did it, okay, and it became FeO, iron oxide. That's why Mars looks rusty and red, right? It had a lot of oxygen at one point and water vapor. And then the Earth stands out like this big blue marble, or as Carl Sagan said, a pale blue dot. Okay, that was my favorite scientist, And the pale blue dot that is our planet is going to be visible from many, many thousands of light years away, because if we have the technology to look for oxygen in an atmosphere, then they will have too. And if they're 100 years ahead of us, they've got a far better way, And the reason I say oxygen is because, the oxygen would, like I said, leave an atmosphere. In a stable planet, the oxygen will leave the atmosphere and bind with everything in the ground. Our planet is not stable. It's not in equilibrium. It's in something called disequilibrium. We have an abundance of oxygen. And the reason we do is because, and here's the magic, it's being replenished. Something's replenishing it. Well, you could say, well, what's replenishing it? Volcanic eruptions, reactions with minerals in the ground. Oh, yeah, all those things do a little bit of that in some ways in the end. However, the majority of the oxygen is being replaced by life. And so that's the thing that stands out like a sore thumb, this overabundance of oxygen. And any extraterrestrial species worth its, development salt, okay, would be able to register that and recognize that this oxygen is important. So that's why we would be a beacon in the cosmos. That's why alien life might come here. They would say, ooh, look, another oxygenated planet. There's an overabundance, therefore there's probably life. Let's go see. And then they get here and they look at us and say, there's no intelligent life here. Let's go. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And let me ask you this, because this is always a question that I've struggled with. And we all know that we are here. And if an alien is looking at us, then they are there. If that is true, right, if those 2 points then are true, then there are millions, if not billions, of aliens and planets out there. So my question to you is, why would they care then about that pale blue dot? Why would they care about us? Because again, if those two facts are true, we are here and they are there, that means that there are millions or billions. So what makes us, in your opinion, special for them to want to come our direction?
Well, see, now we have to border on something else. We have to border on thinking about an alien species that's curious and thirsty for knowledge. Now, we are exploring our solar system. The first views of Pluto from the New Horizons spacecraft were stupendous, and that is very interesting to me. So another alien race is possibly, and we can't assign our morality or our way of thinking and patterns to other species. That's not the good thing to do, like when a dog wags his tail. Oh, he's happy. Well, not necessarily, actually. There could be other reasons he's wagging his tail. Cats wag their tails when they're irritated. Okay, so I don't think you want to assign our patterns of thought to other creatures. But there are other creatures out there that are also curious and are interested in finding other worlds. Why? Because maybe their world is already in decline. Why? Because maybe their star is dying, like ours will in 5 billion years, our sun. And if that's the case, well, we're going to have to find another place. And where are we going to look? Well, we can't look in our solar system because even though our solar system might momentarily have a more habitable Mars, the answer is that we're going to have to leave this solar system. We have to leave our cradle. And when we do, we're going to be going out there and finding other worlds. Maybe these aliens, these creatures, if the intelligent species out there are actually leaving their cradle to find another place they can go. And then everybody says, oh, well, that's an invasion. Well, not necessarily, okay, because we don't know what their thought processes are. We don't know whether they might be able to terraform. We don't know whether Mars will suddenly become, a planet that looks a little different than it does now because they have technology beyond ours and they're terraforming it, and they know we can't go there. I know that here on our planet, if there's intelligent species here, which I tend to think there is. I've had a couple of experiences that indicate to me that there's something more than we're capable of happening here. There's probably creatures that are still, remember the Wandjina that had mastery of the water to live under the ocean? What if the Wandjina myth wasn't a myth? What if they're really here, and what if they are underwater? That is where we are not. We don't have mastery of the water. We are there temporarily for a little while and not very deep. The deep ocean is a realm that we simply do not know. And you say, well, we have these maps at the bottom of the ocean. They're just beautiful. Yeah, that's true. But when were those maps made and how? Well, that's that bathymetry, that study of the ocean floor, that topology of the ocean floor was done by a survey mission. So you're looking at data that's years and years and years old. Just because we know what it looked like at one point, we don't know what it looks like now. We don't have a continuous view of our deep oceans at all. So if there's creatures here, well, heck, I'd be in the ocean. Yeah. That's right. In the ocean or on the moon. But then you'd say, well, wait a minute. They got this lunar reconnaissance orbiter, and it can see things 30 feet across at its best resolution. and it's publicly available. The entire world can see this data, which you can too. Everybody can in your audience. They can go see it, and this is something that they would say, well, we can't really go to the moon because there's too much of a presence there. Let's go and hide in plain sight. Let's go right onto their planet and let's go under their water where we can hide from them and be completely invisible to their current technology. And whoever came up with that in the alien world has probably been promoted because that's a great idea.
Well, it's an interesting segue because I read an article recently that was published about you and an experience you had on a submarine. Now, you brought up the oceans. I'm always fascinated by that topic because it makes me realize, just as a very humble when it comes to science, I don't have the degrees that you do, but when I see those headlines, makes me realize how much we don't know about our own planet. And yet so many scientists go on the record and claim they know so much about other planets, yet we do not really fully understand our own. Now, this article went into your background and a little bit of an experience you had. Let you tell the story. What exactly happened?
When I was young, I wanted to join the Air Force, and I was looking forward to applying to the Air Force Academy. But then I ended up being denied because of the fact that I had a heart issue at the time. The heart issue is one that did come back a couple more times in later life, right up to 3.5 years ago when I had to have heart surgery for a third time. So clearly it was the right choice. Don't want me flying around this big old plane that, crashed into a mountain because something happened. Okay. But the bottom line is, I did the next best thing. I became as close to an expert as I could be on underwater technology, because outer space, inner space, right? The ocean. To me, those two places were fascinating to me. For the outer space, you had to prevent your habitat from exploding outward from the pressure. You had to keep the pressure in. In the inner space, you had to keep the pressure from crushing you, and you had to push out. So basically, it's like reversing the sign on the pressure equation. That's very simplified, but of course, that's the nature of it. So I was very fascinated with submarines. I started a business that actually, my whole visual effects business started by creating these miniatures of full-size submarines that actually worked underwater in exactly the same way that real subs do. Ballast tanks, the whole 9 yards. They would submerge, they would dive, they would surface, and do all these things. And then I created the Alvin, which is the mini sub from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and that was fully operational with lights and everything. And we got picked up by a group that was doing a mini series in London, and so we filmed in London. So my background led into submarines that way, and submarines led into working for a large defense contractor as a DoD contractor. That led to clearances. That led to work that was special work for fairly high-end folks in the U.S. government, and that led to a statement or a comment to me from one of the folks that said, "Would you like to go for a ride in a sub?" Yeah, okay. And so there I was. I was on this sub. And I can't say when it was or where, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And I know that leads to all kinds of controversy. Oh, he's not telling the truth, blah, blah, blah. Well, you know what? I understand that, and I have to deal with that. Okay, sorry. And the fact is, when we went out to sea, I had that was the most fun I ever had, to be honest with you. It's basically like a sewer pipe with end caps, okay? And on the surface, it pitches and rolls like a son of a gun. Wow. And the passageways are kind of narrow, and you have to turn sideways to let someone go by. In most cases, and it wasn't too much fun at first, but once you're underwater, it feels like you feel now, and all your listeners feel now. It feels totally still, and the only way you know you're moving is you feel a subtle vibration in your feet every once in a while, and then if you're turning, the sub banks in the turns, and you feel just a little bit different, and that difference, maybe you feel a little heavier, maybe you feel a little off kilter. And that goes on for like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, as it's turning. And these turns are something that tells you, oh, we're actually underway and moving, because I thought we had stopped. And I believe it or not, I didn't think we I didn't think that we were actually underway. I thought we stopped somewhere. But no, we were actually moving at quite a clip. And anyway, so being seasick, I went into the what they call a sonar shack, which is just to the right of the command center. And just to the right is a bank of sonar displays. And the submarines have multiple sonars, 2 sonars, in fact, that are separate systems, but sort of complement each other. They can listen, and of course you have a system that can ping, and there was none of that going on. We weren't pinging. But I know that there was another sub that we were kind of playing a cat and mouse with. And while we were looking for this other sub.
A friendly sub? Was this if I can ask?
No, of course. This was an exercise.
Okay, gotcha.
Right? Basically, they would never put a civilian on a sub. Hey, let's go kill some Russians, or let's go hunt the Russians.
Hey, you never know.
No Jack Ryan stuff here. So I'm out there, and I was a little seasick. I went to the guy that passed as the doctor on the boat, as a kid, practically, and I got a patch that I could put on my neck. The patch wasn't publicly available at that point, I don't think. But in fact, I doubted it would work, but it did. But it took a while. And so to kind of relieve my stomach and get my bearings back, I went over to the sonar shack and I sat in one of the chairs in front of one of the systems right next to I called him the sonar kid, the kid that was manning the sonar just to my right. Now my sonar was running, and he didn't have a problem with me sitting there because it was sort of like an ancillary system. But anyway, as I'm sitting there, I had my eyes closed and I was zoning out, and I was doing that to try and let my stomach, rest. And all of a sudden, I'm awake, and it was probably many minutes later. I think I might have actually dozed off a little sitting on the chair. All of a sudden, I hear him yell, con sonar, fast mover, fast mover. And I'm like, what? Wait, what? I'm jolted awake. Adrenaline's pumping because I'm thinking, fast mover, was that a torpedo? Are we about to die? What the heck happened? I should have said no to this trip. I'm going to die out here because I want to have a pleasure cruise on a submarine. Oh, no. And I was thinking all those things. Well, the executive officer just comes calmly around the corner from where his station was right nearby, and he says, what do you got? And the kid's starting to talk. Now, as I've said before to folks, submarines are loud on the inside but quiet on the outside. The sound doesn't get out. So it was hard to hear everything they were saying. But the seats are bolted down, and I had to scooch forward. The very, very corner of my butt on the very corner of the chair. It was not very comfortable. And I was doing that so I could overhear their conversation, but do it in a way that didn't look like I was overhearing their conversation. From someone else, it was totally awkward. I'm sure my neck sticking out. Well, I'm just something I do every day.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I didn't hear the range and the bearing. I could see this faint trace developing on the sonar. And when the XO said, how fast is that moving? Because he was facing me and the kid was facing the screen. And then he turned to the right and he wasn't facing me. But when he told the executive officer how fast he calculated the movement, he said it loudly because he was sort of incredulous. He said, several hundred knots, sir. And the XO didn't bat an eyelash. He said, okay, can you... he said something about confirming it or whatever, and the kid confirmed it. And he said, yeah, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir, several hundred knots. And the XO said, okay, log it and dog it. And the kid said, sir, yes, sir. And that was it.
Now help us out with the conversion here. Several hundred knots. How fast is that?
Well, several hundred knots. I mean, if we look at how fast a knot is it? Let's see now. Knots per mile per hour.
No, see, I put you on the spot here.
No, that's okay. That's okay because that's actually a good question. It's easy. I mean, 1 mile an hour is like 0.8 knots. Okay, so if you take several hundred knots and multiply it by or divide it by 0.8, that tells you how fast this was apparently going. I didn't hear the exact sound, the exact number. He said several hundred. He didn't say how many, which is kind of odd. Yeah. He would typically be able to say, okay, that's a ship moving at 30 knots, or 22 knots, or 15 knots, 12 knots. We'd hear that. But he said several hundred. I was like blown away. Yeah. I mean, what is that going to be? What does that mean? That's crazy. So I don't know. I think that it was probably just a crazy object. I didn't know what it was. They confirmed that it was happening and that it wasn't the machine anomaly. And then when they looked to find out what it actually was, it was unknown. So I'm sitting there and listening to this entire exchange. The XO just matter-of-factly said, okay, log it and dog it. And he said, sir, yes, sir. And I said, whoa, wait, what's going on here? I stood up. Mr. Big Shot here. Remember, I've been invited to go on a Navy sub. Mm-hmm. I must be important, right? I must be important. Mm-hmm. I had a clearance. Hey, I'm an important guy, right? So I go up to the XO. Oh, XO, I kind of know what these fast movers are. Is there anything I can help you with? He looks at me, and he smiles. He says, Mr. D'Antonio, are you having a good trip? Yes, sir, I am. He says, let's keep it that way. He turns and walks away. Yeah, so that's like, that was my my moment where I just sort of slinked back to the seat and pretended I didn't say anything, So, I mean, look, there's no place for an ego. And obviously, I kind of had a little bit of not necessarily arrogance, but I had a little ego, thinking, look at me. I'm so important and I get to go on this boat, wow. Yeah, but guess what? They only share with you the things that are important to share with you. Okay. And they didn't share that, and I didn't ask any further. Now, let's jump ahead about, say, like 4 or 5 years. I had to do a job for the Joint Chiefs of Staff in Washington, and I did the job. And one of the chiefs was someone that actually became a friend of mine, and I did a special job for him. And he said, "Why don't you drive it down? Come down for the afternoon." And when his wife was making some lemonade for us, I leaned over and I asked him, what do you know about the Fast Mover program? Is there anything you can tell me? That's pushing the boundaries of friendship when you start asking about stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I kind of couched it in a way that he would know that I wasn't trying to pry for data I shouldn't have. But how can you do that when this is like something that's so amazing? And he could have said, I have no idea what you're talking about. He could have said, I don't know. He said, what's that? But he didn't. He said, I can't, I'm sorry, Mark, I can't talk about that program. Wow. Whoa. That was what did it for me. I drove home from Washington, like nearly smashing into cars because I was like so excited. I couldn't believe I kept reliving that moment. Mm-hmm. I just heard one of the Joint Chiefs tell me that this is a real program. Well, I witnessed it. I saw it in action, and there must be a lot of these things out there. The way the XO reacted, it wasn't like, wow, what's that? It was like, oh, one of these again kind of a thing. And they had him log it and dog it, which means log it, but then hide it. And that got logged into the program, I think, that was the Fast Mover program, So I think that these objects are very well known. And I didn't talk about my experience at all for decades, actually, until the Russians came out and started talking about theirs. Because when the Russians came out and started talking about it, then they realized, okay, this is going to get public fast, and it's going to get front and center. I want people to understand that this isn't just the Russians.
Now, can you explain a little bit and expand on what the Russians were seeing or what they had talked about?
Well, the Russians talked about their unknown submerged objects they have seen as well. Mm-hmm. And there's a good record of the Russian USOs that are out there. These are fascinating too, and when it came time to talk about this stuff, I was a little nervous about talking about it, of course, because I didn't want this to be something that, defined me. It's like a whistleblowing thing or anything, but the Russians did the whistleblowing. I just said, yeah, me too. We it happens here too, and that's it. And frankly, it's not really a big deal. Yeah. From as far back as the Wandjina myth, okay, there have been rumors of creatures, people, beings that live under the ocean. Am I saying that's what's there? No, I'm not. Could it have been something else? Yes. Could it have been a strange anomaly in the sonar? Absolutely. But the evidence mounts against it. Yeah. Every step of the way. And that's the thing that we have to take is, again, science people will take data, process the data. The data tells us one thing. The data says this was an odd object. It was a solid thing moving at several hundred knots underwater. No known human device can do that. The fastest human device is something called the Squall torpedo, which moves 200 knots underwater. Mm-hmm. And it creates a steam sheath around it. And it's a last-ditch torpedo that's fired, and it goes in a straight line, and it's the loudest thing in the ocean. And this thing was almost the silent trace. So what was it? I can't tell you. But I can tell you that it was nothing that we've ever made. So, I mean, that's...
Do you speculate at all what it could have been?
I do sometimes speculate, but then I always add a caveat that, like I just did, it could be all those things I mentioned.
Yeah. But I mean, does Mark have an idea of what it is? Like if I made you give me one answer, are we talking about top secret technology here or something more unexplained?
See, I thought, could it be a project that'll end up in the Black Vault someday? Maybe. Okay, but frankly, I think that it was something that our Navy knows is there, but they can't do anything about it. Just like the Russians can't do anything about it, the Chinese, the Australians, all the people that have these subs at sea probably have seen these things. I know the Russians have. I know the U.S. has. Well, those are two big superpowers. Yeah. So the other powers in the world probably have seen them as well, depending on their exposure in the ocean. And my personal theory is that we're looking at something that is very, very likely technology from another place.
And if this happened decades ago, more than likely something even closely related to that technology, if it was ours, meaning human, would be out by now, or at least hinted at, or at least speculated about, very much like what we see flying in the air. But in the water, it's a completely different world. We don't have technology, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't have technology that even to this day, decades later after this, that would account for this. Is that right? Or is some technology starting to emerge?
That is correct. We don't have anything that can come close to what we saw, what I witnessed. As a passive observer, and then told to go sit down in my room. Basically, just go sit and be quiet.
And you got grounded on the sub.
I got grounded. I was grounded. I asked Dad the wrong question. Can't borrow the car. Yeah. So so that was something that, again, I have lived with this for a number of decades, just like astonished that this happened. And this, again, that also propelled me further into ufology because I thought, well, now I'm very interested in these USOs. And since then, people have sent me USO footage. Look at this green light moving underwater. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, that's the Nautilus from 20,000 Leagues. I get it. Okay, you're trying to hoax me. I got you. Okay, fine. But then I got something else like that wasn't. Okay, so people see things. Now, could they be biological things? Yeah, there is bioluminescent things. There is, if you move a physical object through the water at a certain rate at a certain location in the world, it will cause luminescence to occur. And so we have to be aware that the luminescence, in a sense, is a little skid mark, essentially, potentially, of this technology. Just like the skid marks that Doug Trumbull and I are looking for with UFOs, that are using advanced propulsion concepts, right? We had that system we originally called UFOTOG 2. It was Doug's original invention of UFOTOG, which is that Humvee that had telescopes sticking out of it. They could track from various instruments, track an object moving through the sky, an anomalous object. Well, we renamed it to UFOTOG 2, and then when we realized the word UFO was in it, all the funding goes the other way, so we changed it to the Aerial Anomaly Detection System. And that can serve to look for asteroids, meteors, UFOs, and anything else in the sky, right? So clearly, the rename, which occurred just a few months ago, is something that is still young in the minds of those that are looking to help us out. So we'll get funding for that. But see, in the same way, we're looking for skid marks in the sky, skid marks left over by a technology that we can't detect with our ordinary systems. Now, you might say, well, that's crazy. If you can see it, it's there. If you can't, it's not. Well, that's not true. Mm-hmm. That's not true. All you have to do is look into a little bit of physics, namely some string theory, and you'll see that you can actually use dimensional travel in some forms. And dimensional travel will account for everything we see that UFOs do. They shimmer. They change color. They dart from place to place, or they vanish one place and reappear instantly some other place. Everything there is explainable in this propulsion, string theory propulsion concept. So I think that if they're using that, then they would technically be able to punch out of the X, Y, and Z, all moving through time, our 4 dimensions, and go into this in-between place called the bulk, like bulk produce, okay, and then punch in anywhere else in the universe. And that punch-out, punch-in process, I think, is what we see. And, as I said, We're only 5,000 years into our recording of written history. We still are at a point where we have now been able to see these future concepts, these future possibilities. We don't have the energy or the technology to accomplish them at this point. So right now, they're just vapor projects, right? They're just thought processes, a thought problem, right? But so was the Alcubierre drive before they figured out a way to reduce the amount of energy to make it more plausible. And then Sonny White at NASA did just that, and now it's a funded lab. See, little by little, we're chipping away at this cosmic nut, and we're going to actually figure out how to circumvent the speed of light because it's the speed limit in our 4 dimensions. And we're going to figure out a way to ply our oceans in a little bit more depth and a little bit more capability. We can't, we only have sonar in the ocean. There's no other way to detect things in the water.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, that's very primitive. Beaming a sound wave.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, there's got to be another way that is out there, and certainly an extraterrestrial race, if they're here and in our oceans, as they believe so, they're going to find it.
Yeah.
They have found it already, and they're using it here. I don't know. I can't shake the thought that all the things I've experienced are the result of something that may have come from another place.
In the last 5-6 minutes that I have you, Mark, I do want to talk about your work with MUFON. I've seen many of the written papers that you've done and the analyses that you've done, being their chief photo and video analyst. I know it's kind of a loaded question here, and you only got 5 minutes to kind of explore it, but it sounds like you're fairly convinced at alien life not only being out there, but are you 100% to make sure I'm accurate that they are here, or you're likely that they're here? I mean, where are you at before I ask you this?
Well, as a science guy, I can't ever say that I'm 100% certain. Okay, 100% certainty comes with data that will be able to show provably that that's true. Okay, so I'll never be able to say 100% certainty with that they're here, but I can say that I strongly believe, and I think it's very likely that they would have found us by now, and that they have been here and have visited in the past. I think they're responsible for some of the myths that may have arisen in the past. I think they're responsible for the appearance of this halo around the heads of deities throughout many religions across the world, from cultures that never spoke to each other. Their deities have a halo. The Wandjina have a halo. Okay, Renaissance paintings have a halo. Okay, the Valcamonica creatures in the cave have a halo. These are all disparate cultures that never communicated with each other, yet they show this halo. Well, that came from somewhere. Well, you got to explain that. Why a halo? Why a halo? So that is something that, is it a germ field? Is it a biofield that protects them? Was it a form of a space helmet? I don't think so. I think it was more of an electrical thing, which is why it's shown as a clear thing and always shimmery. So in my view, I think that this sort of points to the fact that something's happened here that we don't really understand, and I think it has come from off-world. I think it's something from creatures that have found us. We've been here for 4.6 billion years. We've had an oxygen atmosphere for several hundred million years. Of any note. In fact, the highest level of oxygen we had here on the planet was during the Permian period. It was 33% in oxygen, and that, of course, that gave rise to giant dinosaurs and so forth, and giant fauna, giant plants. And then, it's down to 21%. But still, it's going to be visible from anywhere you look at it in our galaxy, that you can see. If you can see the sun, and you can see the atmosphere of the Earth, which we're now approaching the ability to do that. Okay, if you can do that and see this in the atmosphere of a planet, then you're going to know that there's probably life replenishing that oxygen, and you might go there. So we're a target. We're a freaking green light looking from anyone looking at us. So I suspect that we've probably been visited or are being visited by more than one species, more than one extraterrestrial race.
Is there a case that really leans you towards believing that and thinking that? A lot of the listeners to the Black Vault Radio are not necessarily into the UFO phenomena per se, like you and I are, and know a lot of the background of the cases. But as a scientist and somebody who really does approach this in a very logical way, is there a case that sticks out more than any other, with either physical evidence or video evidence or photographic evidence, that leans you towards believing that?
Well, I can't really speak to data that I can't show, like the submarine experience.
Sure.
But that clearly was something that was basically proof beyond proof for me. Because there it was, moving several hundred knots, something underwater. Clearly wasn't a plane. We were underwater. So this means it was that something was here doing that. Nothing that we have on Earth does that. So for me, that's tantamount to the ultimate proof.
Yeah.
But I can't get data. I can't look at that data, so I can't show that. So in terms of any other case, there is one case, and unfortunately I have to go back to the 50s. And I'm not going to say Roswell or Socorro, only because those two cases have been so beaten to death in a variety of different ways, and in positive and negative light. So I don't think we're ever really going to know the answer to either of those, frankly. But there was a case in the 50s where a father was with his little daughter, I believe, at a sporting event that was not started yet, and he had like a 16 millimeter camera, and he saw these objects moving through the sky, and he videotaped them. He actually captured them on film, and it's only a 3-second video, John, but this shows these objects are two bright silver balls, and you just can't see their shape. They look like silver dots, actually. And these things move through the sky at a high rate of speed, extremely high rate of speed. And it's actually in Great Falls, I believe, Great Falls, and I think it's the Nick Mariana footage. Right, so if you look up Nick Mariana, Mariana, UFO footage, you'll actually see the 3-second video. Some will say, well, maybe it was a daytime meteor. Oh, yeah, daytime meteors do come in. But guess what they do? They also leave behind a massive trail. All right? Just remember the Chelyabinsk meteor from a few years ago in Russia. It left behind this gigantic smoke plume as it entered the atmosphere. And as it enters the atmosphere, anything causing it to glow is causing it to burn, causing it to leave a trail behind it. All right? And these were bright silver. So I thought it was pretty impressive. And I've never heard a satisfactory answer for what these were, these two objects. But they move very quickly behind this mast of a light tower or whatever it was that he was looking at. And it's really happening. It's not doctored footage in any way. And I think that's pretty cool. It's the Nick Mariana UFO footage. To me, that's probably the one that the jury is still out for me on that one. I can't figure out anything about whether this is real or fake. I think it's actually, well, first of all, I think it's real, but I don't think it's something that's man-made. Let's put it that way.
That's interesting that with the technology today, here in 2018, with the cell phone cameras and everything getting better, when you answer that question, you go back to the 50s. Nothing wrong with that. I'm fascinated by that answer from you. And the last question then I'll throw out to you before we end the interview here is, what are your thoughts about the field of UFO study today, with all that technology and the internet and the power of all of these tools that we have at our disposal? Do you think we're better off than we were when Nick Mariana filmed that UFO footage that was 3 seconds long in the 50s, or are we worse off than at that point?
It's a mixed bag, and that's probably not the answer that people want to hear. With every gain in technology, you also have a gain in the capability to hoax. And every 14-year-old kid in his basement could generate a rendering these days that is photoreal and can look like a UFO doing something or other. Now, luckily, I also work with CG a lot and have been doing so for almost 15 years. So besides being a physical and digital model maker, I can recognize the usages of CG in a lot of productions and say, well, that's pretty good, or that's really good, but here's a flaw. You can always find the flaw. You just have to know where to look, and you also have to get the best footage. If you don't have very good footage, well, then you're kind of stuck. You can only say so much. Mixed bag. We don't really know. We don't really have the ability to determine if anything is absolutely real, because we can fake video so well now. However, the fact is, with projects like the Aerial Anomaly Detection System, or formerly known as UFOTOG-2, that Doug and I are doing, and there's other projects like that actually out there that others are doing, things like this are going to be able to show with data multiple data points per sighting. And we're making these little platters that you can spread all over the Southwest, anywhere around the country or world, and put them there, and they'll just be remote things that are sensing the sky and looking at things. And this remote viewing is going to give an unbiased view of data from a number of different perspectives. You know, we have gamma ray detector, spectral detector, UV, IR views, visual, of course. So the entire sky is captured, but we're going to see it with 5 or 6 or 7 different sensors at the same time. We're going to see each of these sightings, and we'll get this data, magnetic data, gravitational data, all these things that will help us figure out what we're looking at. So, for instance, you see a white light, and it just vanishes on one of our cameras. Okay, well, that could just be a plane with its landing lights turning the other way. Okay, and the landing lights are no longer in view. But if the lights go out and you suddenly get a burst of gamma rays at that location, what's that telling you? Well, that's telling you that those two events may be tied together. And gamma rays are a predicted outcome from when a craft that we've talked about before, using, say, string theory type propulsion, is blinking out of our dimensions and going into this space in between, so to speak, the bulk. Okay, at that point, it's going to give off Hawking radiation and gamma rays. And the gamma rays are the things we're going to be looking for. Hawking radiation is notoriously expensive yet to detect. But we're going to have other sensors looking for other specific things that are happening at the same time. So I think that's where we have to go to combat all the hoaxers, to combat all the fakery, to combat the people that take these images that they, and videos that they think are real. We need to bring to bear other technology that can look at the same sighting with multiple different eyes to see different things. And that's kind of, I think, what's going to be the next century of ufology is going to be in trying to do that. Well, if they don't just land on the White House lawn.
That's right. Well, I wish you the best of luck with that project. Definitely keep me informed. We'll bring you back anytime to update the audience on your work. But I started the show with the compliment, but I'm going to end it the same way. I really do admire your approach and logical thinking when it comes to this phenomenon. I wish that more scientists would do that in the mainstream media. Sadly, there are those that get a lot of airtime on television that are known as the skeptics. I won't name names because I've interviewed them myself for different shows. But sadly, they're just kind of known as the skeptics out there. But I do admire you for your approach. I'm really glad and want to thank you for spending the time here on the Black Vault Radio with everyone.
John, the Black Vault's a wonderful place to be. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate that. And if you want to see everything that Mark and I discussed, including his website, link fxmodels.com, you can contact him through that link. I'll also send out some other links to you all on the show notes page at www.theblackvault.com/show notes. Again, Mark, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Although that concludes my interview with Mr. Marc D'Antonio, don't go away. Coming up, I just received a document that sheds new light on a turning point in American history. This never-before-revealed information explores an event you rarely hear about, but it should not be forgotten. That's coming up in TBV Unredacted. In this episode's TBV Unredacted segment, I want to talk about a new document that I just got from the National Security Agency. Now, as some of you may recall my interview with the director of the National Security Archive, Mr. Nate Jones, Nate talked a lot about document declassification and what they call mandatory declassification reviews, how to appeal, and really went into his background with using the Freedom of Information Act. Now, although I learn stuff all the time about the FOIA, there is one thing that I really enjoy doing, and that is what's called the Mandatory Declassification Review, or MDR. Now, in short, because I've talked about it on this show before, and I don't want to beat it to death every episode, but really what an MDR is is it is a request that an agency review a document that may have been released prior, however, had heavy redactions. After 2 years after a review on a document, you can request an agency to re-review it. If you don't do it and request it under the FOIA, let's say you request it in 2018 and the document was last reviewed in 2010, generally the agency is just going to give you the 2010 version. However, 8 years has gone by, so it's possible that some of those redactions just don't apply anymore. Well, this is what I did with a document about the USS Pueblo incident. Now, if you're not familiar with this incident, it's a pretty amazing part of history that you don't really hear about. And this happened on January 23rd, 1968. Now, the USS Pueblo was a U.S. Navy research ship, and it was in international waters, according to the United States. According to North Korea, it had encroached into their water, and they took the ship captive. There was no battle. There was no fight. In fact, this was the first U.S. warship that was captured without a fight since June 22nd of 1807, if you can believe it. That was the USS Chesapeake that was actually forced to surrender by the HMS Leopard. Now, fast forward now to 1968, the Pueblo was captured by the North Koreans without a fight. There were 83 crew members that were taken hostage, one of which was killed during that initial day of the attack on the Pueblo. They were held hostage and actually held hostage for nearly a year before they were released. Now, the United States finally confessed that they were there spying and pretty much said that they wouldn't do it again. And the North Koreans literally psychologically tortured at least one that is very well known, but if not more, to get them to confess to certain things that may or may not even have been true. And it's an amazing story, and it's not one that you generally hear about, like I mentioned. The coolest part, cool, I don't know, maybe be the most interesting. But after they were released, the North Koreans actually still, to this day, have the USS Pueblo as a hostage. Apparently, it is there and part of a museum, but they do they do have it as a museum ship, but it is still considered an active U.S. naval vessel. So that in itself is a pretty interesting aspect to this story. Now, there are documents that have been released before on the incident, quite a few actually, but many of which are redacted, and one of which I went after was the classified information that was on board the USS Pueblo. Now, when the North Koreans took a hold of the ship, obviously they not only got those 83 crew members, but they got all of the information, all of the technology, everything that was on board. And what was on board were some highly classified pieces of paper. And the North Koreans got a hold of all of that. Well, the United States, in addition to having a big concern over what was going to happen to those sailors, also had a pretty big concern over what was on board and what intelligence the North Koreans just gathered. Now, they had a memorandum that was created by the Navy, and it was sent into the intelligence community, and namely to the National Security Agency for intelligence purposes on what the North Koreans just inherited. Well, I would say approximately, I haven't measured, but approximately 50% of this document has been redacted for many, many, many years. And they would not release all of the classified material that was on the USS Pueblo that was now in the possession of the North Koreans. So I requested an MDR on this particular document. To my surprise, I actually got them to declassify the entire list. There are a couple exceptions, now not exceptions as a whole, but just minor redactions. However, the entire list is now visible of what classified material was on board the USS Pueblo. From a historical standpoint, this is pretty cool because this has never been out before. This gave a little bit of insight on what the USS Pueblo had on board and what they were doing. Now, there's a lot of speculation to the lengths of what the USS Pueblo was doing. Obviously, the United States admitted that they were that they were spying a bit and they were doing some shenanigans out there, and they wasn't necessarily on the books, and they weren't being open with North Korea in 1968. Not a big shock, but that that came about as this whole thing unfolded. There's a lot of speculation they were up to a lot more than just that, and what they were looking into and what they were spying. But regardless, this list had never been out before. I filed the MDR, and sure enough, I was able to get the NSA to release. You can read every item on the list now. Again, there are some minor redactions, which appear to be more names and maybe a few codes here and there, but for the most part, you can read everything on this list. I'll link that at the show notes page, www.theblackvault.com/show notes. You're listening to episode number 15. If you like history, look into some of those more details about the USS Pueblo, the incident, and more documents. I've got tons of documents on this. I just wanted to profile that one because that was a major MDR victory that I just kind of didn't expect. I thought that they would maybe release a few more things, but not the entire list. But thankfully, after all of these years, the list is now out in the open. So for all of you history buffs out there, I hope you enjoy that. Thank you so much for listening to the Black Vault Radio. I hope you like this a little bit more condensed version of the overall show. If you do miss those headlines and some of the bantering about the not only headlines, but the scientific discoveries and what you may or may not have missed in the mainstream media. If you missed that, let me know, because that does motivate me to create that other show, maybe stream that on the same channel, but create a different playlist, a different RSS feed, a different subscription just for that. As always, everything is free. You can download all of the previous shows at www.theblackvault.com/show notes. And you can write me directly at contact@theblackvault.com. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time. This is John Greenewald Jr. signing off. Thanks again.